One of my observations from like a couple of years ago was like CJ was the consistent Calvinist, and he said God determines all things that come to pass, everything without exception. That's what James White says. That's what Calvin said. Now watch this. JP made this thing about Calvinism. God decreed sin before it ever existed. He could have decreed righteousness, but God prefers sin over holiness whenever sin occurs. To the Calvinists out there who say that's not what Calvinism is, let me ask you something. Did God prefer that sin doesn't occur sometimes when it does? Because that's the question. Because that's what you guys are always saying under certain circumstances. But then when somebody like just plainly states it, you're like wavering or waffling. Everything you guys say that everybody else is wrong about, under certain ways of asking the question, you waffle. This is just this in the look, I'm not just being critical in a bad way. I'm saying this is just how it is. Here's the problem. It's like some people are really honest and they understand the implications, and then they'll say it, and it's just this ugliest, not true theology, it seems to me. But at least they're being consistent. None of the Calvinists jump on the bandwagon of the Calvinist train, but they don't actually believe it. Really. I remember CJ was saying that, and then like when other Calvinists like Dr. Falk and Ryan the Presbyterian at the time were saying CJ doesn't know what he's talking about. It's like, well, so James White says, that's what Calvin said. That's what Chris Date would say, because they're honest. And then people are like, that's not what Calvinists believe. We don't think God causes sin. And I'm like, yeah, that seems wrong to me, but it does seem like the logical implications of your system, and especially when it's contrasted against non-Calvinist theology, the things you say we're wrong about that you're right about have the implication, obviously, of God causes all things that come to pass. Because if he didn't, how is it happening? So he posted this, and then Jerry Duckworth, he's been on a lot of shows lately. He seems like a nice dude, but I don't think he's fully dedicated to the implications of his system. Look, he says, non-Calvinists speaking, God didn't have a plan for sin. Bad things happen for no reason. When a baby gets raped, God could have stopped it, but didn't, because he worships free will. By the way, do you even believe God is omniscient? Seems like you're flirting with open theism, because he's friends with Warren McGrew, I guess. I think most people, when Calvinists think they're flirting with free will or open theism, it's because they want to say God didn't determine everything. So does that mean it's open? Well, God didn't determine it. It's not necessary for it to happen. So the question is, if God, so a lot of people operate under this idea that if God knows everything that's going to happen, it couldn't happen otherwise. This is not necessarily true. We don't know how God knows the future. We don't know how that works, is the point. It's true that God knows what will happen, but the question is, how does it operate in time, which God is perhaps outside of? We don't know. But what we do know is the Bible indicates that we make decisions, and there's multiple possibilities, and you make decisions, and you don't have to make a particular situation just because God knows what you're going to do. It's one thing to not know what it's like. What is the text saying? And then it's like, oh, well, that can't be true because I don't see how it could work. Therefore, it has to be this. And therefore, I'm going to reinterpret these verses that are pretty plain, like verses that show God doesn't cause everything that comes to pass. Like when Jesus talks about the the ones who cause the little ones to stumble. He's not saying whoever does causes these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them to be drowned in the sea by basically having cement shoes. I don't think there's any sense that he wants us to think, well, but is what you should think is that God causes all things that come to pass. And so it's like, it doesn't make any sense. If he was concerned about people believing God causes everything that comes to pass, I don't think he would have made that statement. And then JP says, God is perfect foreknowledge, so he has a plan. Yes, that's exactly what I would say. Yes, God knew bad things were going to happen. He didn't stop it. Not because he can't, because he allows for accountability for things. There's no sense in which the Bible presents God as determining sin. Sin is missing the mark. Sin is a thwarting of God's will. Just because you don't have a proper definition of free will, the Bible operates that God is not causing sin, he's redeeming sin. And it's because of other doctrines that you just can't accept it, but it's clearly that God, you don't condemn things that you determine as God secretly. There's no text except for God causes evil, but that context is clear. When you look at the whole Bible, it's like, no. God tells you to not do something, it means he doesn't want you to do it. And then we have this obvious implication that we make decisions. Like, look, think about a time. What do you think the Holy Spirit is given to the church is about? What does that even mean, that the church has the Holy Spirit, which leads us into all truth and righteousness and convicts the world of sin? What does that even mean if God determines your sin and it couldn't be otherwise? It doesn't make any sense. The Holy Spirit works in your life by changing you to be like Christ, by showing you your faults and helping you have the strength to overcome temptation. If God determined so it couldn't be otherwise, none of that makes any sense. It would be deception. That idea would be a deception. And if it's a deception, when I say the Holy Spirit influences you to make more loving decisions towards other people and towards God, he convicts you of sin, which equally is the idea that makes you remember what the right thing to do is and empowers you to do it. But you have to make that decision. But that's what the Holy Spirit's influence is. Now, if it's true that God determines all things that come to pass and it couldn't be otherwise, what I just described, you have to say that is false. It's not true that the Holy Spirit does that. And I want to know, if you're a Calvinist, are you going to tell me that that's not true? That the Holy Spirit of God doesn't influence you and make you think, make it come to mind that sin is bad when you're faced with an opportunity to sin, but you know it's the wrong thing? Are you going to tell me that the Holy Spirit doesn't do that? That I'm wrong about that? Or is that true, but you can't really do anything other than what God determined you to do? If that's true, then why would it would be a farce that we think the Holy Spirit is doing that in us, influencing us in that way. Influence in general as a concept would be false. Yeah. So look, no, you can't box us into being that God doesn't know the future, okay? Because we're not Calvinists and thinking God determines everything. That's the problem of evil. Why does God allow stuff? And you guys are like, to say God allows it. It's like, yeah, I get it. He could intervene and he doesn't. Why doesn't he? Well, not because he determined it and wants you to sin. That's not the answer. And telling me that, or you don't understand what God still allows it, so it's worse than determining it. No, it isn't. No, it is not. That's a faulty way of reasoning. You're saying, oh, you think God's just like taken by surprise. No, we don't. Most of us don't anyway. And the mystery of why God allows it, and considering we have the capability to be, we're made in God's image, and he's saving us for a purpose, and we can make decisions. He allows it because we're responsible. So he doesn't always intervene because we're made in his image. It's like, that's not worse than saying God makes sin happen and then redeems it and pretends like he's fixing a problem that he created. That is not a better answer. And then Jerry Duckworth says, God is not the direct causation in Calvinism. I don't know what you mean by that. Oh, you mean he's not the last link in the chain? If you put enough links in the chain and you slap somebody in the face with it, it's not your fault because you're holding not the direct cause, the direct chain that slaps them in the face. I don't care how many links in a chain you add to a chain. If you're spinning the chain and you hit somebody with it, it's your fault. More links in the chain of what you caused doesn't absolve you of slapping somebody in the face with a chain, because the chain is long enough. The direct cause is the one who determines it, the thing which determines the outcome. And you guys say it's God. I don't add as many links as you can. It's probably just going to hit, it's just going to slap them harder when it hits them in the face. The cause is that which is the source. So the question is God being the non-contingent source of all things that exist and upholding everything and allowing it to exist? Is everyone therefore guilty of it? No. Being the creation of the world and sustaining it to exist is not the same thing as causing everything that happens in the world. The Bible tells us this. Some things are of the world and not of God. That doesn't mean all things are of God and there's more links in the chain, in the sense of the decisive cause of every action is not God. Unless you deny that God can make beings that are capable of making their own decisions and being the source of ideas and concepts. Knowing somebody's, and even if God does know everything we're going to do creatively, he's only the cause of being the maker of us. So we exist. That's a different category. Even if God knows what we're going to do, doesn't mean he invented it. It means he could foresee what other creatures that he creates, which have freedom to be creative, are going to do. And we don't know how that works. Maybe it's not true. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say. So, making God be the cause, the source of all things that happen, the trigger puller, if you will, for sins, is an abomination. Let's be honest here.